Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode on Fit as a Fiddle. Our guest today is actually a good friend of mine from physical therapy school at Columbia, Julia Rosenthal. Julia is a certified pelvic health and orthopedic specialist, and she's also a kettlebell coach. Julia and I connected, like I said, while we were in PT school. Julia, I remember that you either TA'd one of my classes of some kind, I can't remember, and that's when I first met you. And I was like, oh, this girl's so nice, and she knows all her stuff. And here we are, like, I don't know, like some 7+ years later, doing kind of really the same work in pelvic health and orthopedics in New York City. And I love seeing everything that you do out there in social media with your practice, and resonate with so much of, your message and your the way that you kind of want to reshape the world of pelvic health, especially. So I'm so grateful to have you here on the show today and so excited to chat it up with you. So welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for asking me to do this. I'm really excited about it. I think that it's going to be a really fun conversation. So thanks for having me on.
Yay. So we'll just get started with your many specialties. I know you went on after PT school to do a lot more education and self-study and got a lot of certifications. So I'd love for the audience just to get to know a little bit about that background and then kind of what drew you specifically into this pelvic health space.
Yeah, so I started out PT school having absolutely no idea what I was going to do, but definitely having an interest in working with strength training athletes because that's what I loved to do. And those were the people I wanted to help. I just didn't know how that would eventually take form. So after graduating, I decided that I wanted to do a residency specifically in dance medicine, which was not really something I had a whole lot of background in, even if I did have a performance background with singing and musical theater, because I wanted to really be in a space where I learned more about how to watch, break down, prescribe, assess movement. And what better place to do that than in a place where movement is truly all of your client's livelihood. So I did that for that reason. It was a fantastic experience, and I got my orthopedic specialty after doing that. And then made my way back to pelvic health, which had become a passion of mine during PT school. When I actually found out that pelvic health therapists existed. I had no idea until PT school. I know, it's so crazy. And then I found out that pelvic health therapists help people with gut issues, which was a thing I had struggled with for a super long time. So I got really into it at that point. And after finishing my residency, left to go work elsewhere where I could continue to specialize in that. Ultimately became certified. And then, when the world turned upside down during COVID, I decided to start my own practice and start bringing together all of the things that I loved to do, and start introducing loading and training into the pelvic health space, which I think is often lacking in a lot of pelvic health spaces, and try to fill that gap between basically training and moving for longevity and pelvic health physical therapy.
Yes, I agree. So my little story is that I my mom had a lot of pelvic floor issues and a couple of surgeries and things like that when I was younger, but I didn't really understand what they were. And I would drive her when I was in high school. I remember I used to drive her to these therapy sessions. I didn't understand what they were. And then later I was like, you were going to pelvic floor physical therapy? You didn't even tell me what it was, what they were doing. But of course, Indian household, you don't talk about that. And I never knew exactly the details of what she was doing in the room. I would just drive her and pick her up. I was in the waiting room. But it's just so fascinating that, not only is it that we advocate so much to our patients on a daily basis, talk to your friends, talk to your colleagues, tell people, don't have to share personally what's going on with you, but
right.
Just let them know that this kind of therapy exists and that people can get help for, the various conditions, some of which we'll probably touch on today that we work with. But I'm like, even as a student who had gone through physical therapy, like prerequisites and like entering the profession, I personally had no idea that like the depth of the field and exactly what it was doing and how it was serving different people. So I'm on the same page. And I think that
Yeah, it's
also like
wild.
it helps us like I think it also informs our work even more when we are working with patients. And I'm sure that you've experienced this so many times that somebody might come to you with a hip injury and then you're doing their intake and talking to them and you're screening and asking them all the questions. And, you know, maybe not in the first session, but at some point they'll be like, yeah, you know, you're just leaking all the time, coughing. And I'm like, we put this on
Yeah.
your intake form to ask these questions and you just kind of glanced over the whole thing and didn't even answer or answered incorrectly, you know?
Well, what's interesting is I actually, all my clients get the same intake form. So it has like pretty extensive questions about bowel habits and bladder habits and sexual function and, you know, when they last checked up with whatever doctor is appropriate for them. And most people fill it out and then we end up having a whole conversation. I mean, like, just like you said, right? Even the person who's coming in, I had somebody coming in for elbow pain. And all of a sudden we were having this whole conversation about like they're waking up 7 times a night to go to the bathroom, which is
Yeah.
crazy. So, you know, it's truly ubiquitous. And part of what we are doing is just bringing awareness to the fact that A, these problems are things that you can get help with, and B, that physical therapy is a thing that can help you with them.
Yes. And as in I'm sure our opinion, one of the most important pieces to all of this, because you can kind of mask it with doing a lot of other things. But if we're not treating the source of the problem, which often is movement, body awareness, postural coordination, muscle activation, you're kind of masking it. And so, I mean,
Right.
it's just like the mainstay of physical therapy is just understanding your body, really getting connected with what are you doing, how are you moving, and how that applies to your functional activities, not just, can I do a glute set, but can you do it actively when you're picking up your baby and
Right.
not experience the type of pain that you might otherwise, you know, be able to like easily avoid. It's just a small cue. It's usually subtle, the work that we do. And sometimes it's not, sometimes it's very complicated, but sometimes it's really subtle, at least in our eyes. It can be really subtle, but it's so
Yeah,
life-changing to a patient
absolutely.
in their life. Cool. Okay. So I want to dive into a little bit about how the kettlebell stuff that you've been doing. I love seeing you do all of your workouts. I don't have any kettlebells at home and I quit my gym membership because now I work out just at home, but I'm like, I kind of want to just invest in a bunch just so I can follow some of your workouts.
Well, it's like a whole gym in a little ball of iron. So you don't need a lot of them, like maybe 1 or 2, and you'll be off to the races. But so I had been training with kettlebells kind of off and on for a long time pre-COVID. And I always use them as a load for people because I think they're an easier way to teach carrying than dumbbells. They're just more ergonomic, I think, than a dumbbell. But then I got really into it during the pandemic when I quit my gym membership and was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do with myself? So I got really into training with them and like honing the craft basically of the skills that come with doing that. And then I ended up deciding to get certified pretty early in the pandemic. I was like, I love this. I'm doing it. I got certified, let's see, earlier this year. I got certified, or I guess very early 2022, Russian kettlebell certification. And then a few months ago, I did another certification in kettlebells for sports performance. And what I love about that is it's all about training qualities in people, not necessarily getting really good at kettlebell skills, because getting good at kettlebell skills is one thing, but training people how to get off the ground well, how to move quickly, how to have like explosive power. And that's for everybody needs that. It's not just athletes, you know, everybody needs to be able to react and catch themselves when they fall, or be able to, you know, get out of a chair, or if they slip, be able to kind of react to that type of movement and avoid falling. I mean, avoiding falling is one of the most important things we can give people as they age. in addition to, building strength and bone density and promoting good metabolic function and all of those things. So that one, I've been working towards that for a while, and taking courses, or, training with the people who teach that for a long time, but it was fun and exciting to finally get the certification, because it was really just like a weekend of nerding out about things that I love to talk about. So it's been really fun.
I love that. So how do you feel like the work that you're doing right now feels like any different from the way that you like after going through, of course, all of your coursework and post-grad after graduating from PT school? How do you feel like your work is more informed, and what do you feel like is very different from the way that you thought PT should be, or the way that we should treat years ago to now?
Yeah, I think one of the things that I struggled with earlier in my, I guess I've been out for 5 or 6 years now. And I think one of the things I really struggled with in the beginning was, I knew that I had learned enough to know that it was a disservice to always put my hands on people. And I knew that there was value in manual therapy. And I really struggled with the line of like, when do I use it and when do I not? Or how do I use, and if I think I need to use it with a person who I think is maybe going to have a negative reaction for reasons we can get into, to me putting them on the table and doing stuff, then how do I bring that into what I'm doing without having that nociceptive effect on them? And I really struggled with that a lot in the beginning of my practice. And now, I'm always learning. I think there's always room for improvement in every single aspect of what we're doing. And that's why I love PT, because we're just like learning forever. But I think I have gotten better at knowing that, and figuring out when it is and is not in the client's interest to do that, and using manual therapy a little bit more judiciously than I would have done earlier on.
Yeah. And I think also the power of having your own practice, which is incredible, is also making those decisions for yourself and not having to be driven by, like, I worked at a clinic, I won't say which one, but it was a requirement to do about 30 minutes of manual therapy and 30 minutes of exercise. But you were seeing 2 patients at the same time. So it was like off, like half the time you were watching someone doing exercises and cueing them, but doing manual therapy at the same time. And while that could be effective in a lot of ways, that's not how I treat at all right now at all. Like there's no way that that's going to be a hard and fast rule. Like there are times where that might be the session, but that's not going to be every session, and certainly not towards discharge as well, because I really need that patient to understand that they cannot rely on my hands to make themselves feel better. And there are so many tools that I'm sure you use all the time with self-stretching and self-release work. And like, I teach my patients to do like a contract, relax, stretch on their hamstrings all the time without having to use me to do it, or how to mobilize something on their own that's safe, that they can demonstrate to me that they can do it well without having to use me. And I always say, like, PTs are our own PT, right? So there's so many things that I have to do on my own that I feel comfortable doing. But if we can take even 10% of that, and you feel confident in doing it yourself and you feel the benefits, that's what's going to get you through like the third flare up 3 years from now, when if it happens to happen and I'm not around, and you don't want to feel helpless and feel like I have to see this person for the rest of my life. I mean, that's not the point of us. Like, we're always trying to work ourselves out of a job, right, Julia? Like constantly working ourselves out of a job.
I think that when I first put my original website together, I think like somewhere on the website it said like, I'm so excited to meet you, but I'm really looking forward to the day when you leave, like something like that. Because that's genuinely how I feel. Not because I really enjoy meeting people and like getting to know them, but ultimately our goal is to give people a sense of autonomy and make them feel like they aren't reliant on another person to feel well. I mean, that being said, like, because of the model I've sort of fallen into, what ends up happening is there will be a time when a person's symptoms that they originally came to PT for are resolved. And then they're like, but I want to keep, I mean, our sessions feel like workouts and I want to keep doing that. And I'm like, great, you can work out. We can do that. We can keep training, but we're just, that's what we're doing now. Just be aware that if you wanted to go do this on your own, you could, if you wanted to. And I tell people that because I want them to feel like they don't, they're not 100% reliant on me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I tell them if they try to turn all of our sessions into that is, I do not want to just sit here and count your reps and sets. We need to move forward in our plan, and we need to make sure that we're achieving your goals. So if you don't have a goal and we're not talking about that plan of care and modifying and doing things, and we're just coming into a session just to be like, okay, we're going to do this, that's not like, we don't feel fulfilled doing that. Like, we need to use our brains too in our session. And so if it just becomes mundane, whether it's the mundane nature of just doing the same kind of manual techniques and the patient leaves, comes back the next week, same kind of manual techniques, patient leaves, that's not effective, nor is it just sitting there and be like, okay, well, this is the set that you're doing. And I think that's the beauty of PT, is that, like you said, we need to be clear on what our goals are with the patient. The patient needs to be clear on what their goals are, and we're helping them move in a direction to really achieve what they do. And a lot of that has to do with our communication and what our message is to them.
And I think too, I mean, you talked about being in a setting where, the PT time was like the manual therapy time. And then you could kind of like have a corner of your eye on them while they were doing their exercises. And to me, that communicates like, this intervention is important and the exercise intervention is less important. So I don't really need to be around while you're doing that. And I think that's part of the problem with that model, right? The exercise is the intervention. What I tell my patients all the time is like, manual therapy, the point of manual therapy is basically to create a window of opportunity to allow us to do the other stuff, so that you actually can feel like you are in charge of this part of the intervention, and I'm just kind of here guiding you through it. Otherwise, if you just lay on my table the whole time, if you leave, what did you learn from that day? Not much. So
exactly. I'm 100% resonating with all of that. So I think this would be like a little good transition to start talking about, like, just in general, how we talk to patients on moving their bodies and what's safe, what's normal, bridging that gap with pelvic health, which a lot of, my listeners, you guys know that I'm a pelvic floor PT, but I constantly tell you guys I'm an orthopedic physical therapist, and pelvic floor is one thing that I treat. Just like if you went to go, kind of talk to somebody who's a baseball coach, you can't just be like, that coach teaches you how to hold a baseball. That's like one piece of, or sorry, the baseball bat. That's like one piece of like everything that they do in coaching you and training you to be an athlete, right? So that's the same thing. A pelvic floor PT is one, it's almost like bad in our name to call ourselves that in some ways, because people get really confused. So I know a lot of the work you do is kind of integrating fitness and strength and training into pelvic floor health. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about how you talk to your patients about the importance of that.
Yeah, it kind of depends on what they're seeing me for and how I'm going to float it. But there's kind of like two big camps. Camp number one is trauma group. And everybody, trauma is something that a lot of people experience in different levels of trauma. And so I think it's important to kind of think of everyone as having experienced trauma in some way. But what that looks like for different people will be different depending on what their life experience has been. But I think trauma, like talking about trauma as a thing that is housed in our bodies, and then relating that to how movement can help release that, is really important for a lot of people. And what I tell those people when I'm trying to put weights in their hands, instead of just like have them stretch and move around, which there's benefit to those things too. But what I tell them when I'm putting weight in their hands, like, think of, how people use like weighted blankets as a way to relax. It's almost like your body needs that external input to be able to let tension go in certain places. We won't just do it spontaneously. And so I load people in that type of scenario. And then it also becomes like a mindfulness activity for those people, because you get to focus on like where your body feels activated, what it feels like to hold that weight in that position, what it feels like to have something over your head, what it feels like in the moment before you pull something off the ground. You can use it in that way with that population, or really with everyone, to start showing them that like they can learn about themselves through moving under load. So that's kind of like one category of how to talk about it. And then the other is really any pain, and there's an overlap here for sure, but pain is complex. There are a lot of things that contribute to us experiencing pain, but ultimately, a lot of people give that kind of like filling the glass example, and it's like you have the cup of your body and your life, and little by little something gets added to that cup, and you're stressed, you're not sleeping, you had a baby, you sprained an ankle, whatever, things keep getting added to that cup, and then eventually the cup overflows. But so you can start taking things out of the cup, right? You can start addressing all the things that went into the cup to make that cup overflow, and you can make the cup bigger so that more things can go in it. And strength training is the way to make the cup bigger, because you're building capacity in your body, you're building resilience, training is just stress that you're managing appropriately given the person in front of you. So you're building tolerance to stress, and you're building basically like your ultimate goal is to make that cup bigger so that the next time something goes in the cup, there's like maybe a little more room in there for the thing that's coming in.
I love that. I've actually never thought of it that way that you just described it. And I think that's beautiful and very powerful as well. And it really does reshape a lot of things for people who feel, I think like what people might think of when they first hear that is, the limitlessness is at least what I think of. Like you are pretty limitless in the things that you can do if you just allow yourself to experience those things. And then often, like I remember there was one patient that I worked with, she was one of my like earlier on patients in my career, and she had come in with endometriosis, chronic pelvic pain, just, a lot of terrible habits that we really needed to work out of. And I'm sure you can touch on some habit building as well in a moment. But she wasn't able to do like without excruciating pain, like even like a very simple, like 30% isometric adductor squeeze, for example, like some very, very basic muscle activations were extremely painful for her. And then one day I just got her off of the plinth and we went into the gym, which she was very resistant to at the time. And she's like, I don't want to do this. It's like, I really just don't, I want to be in the room with you. I want to be safe. Like she felt very safe there, but I was like, we've done this for like almost a dozen sessions now. And I want you to trust me in what we're doing. So I got her out of the room into the gym and I just played some music and I just had her dance with me. And I was like, the number of like, from a physiological sense, it was impossible that she could have moved her body that way, but so much of it was her just breaking her own barriers that she had set for herself, that she can't do something. And I know it's so cliche to say that, but we have to recognize that with our patients, like even the ones that are the type A perfectionists, like strategizing, like I'm going to be able to do this. I'm like the goal setters, like even with those patients, there's a way to get them to think out of the box and do more than they feel like they could ever do. So I'd love for you to touch on that.
Totally. I love that. I totally agree with that. And it's one of the ways that I talk about that with my clients is that context matters, right? Mm-hmm. So if you've learned basically that doing this exercise in this way doesn't feel good or is painful or is too difficult for you, then or flares you, then when you go do that exercise in that way, your brain's like ready for it. Right. You have that like underlying context. So if we can just shift the context a little bit. A lot of times your body is capable of a lot more than you thought it was. And we just have to change the story around that movement, or movements that look like it a little bit.
And a lot of that has to do with our creativity in that session, which I've found has been the hardest thing for me to have to constantly think out of the box as well. I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, I think of, have you done any of the coursework through the NOI group or any of the like graded motor imagery stuff?
I've heard of the graded motor imagery work, but I haven't taken courses through them.
So I haven't actually taken the course, but I read the book because I had time during the pandemic. And one of the things that I love that so there's 3 stages of graded motor imagery. And the first one is left and right discrimination. And so one of the things that I love to do with people is, one of my mentors also talks about this, Susan Clinton talks about this a lot, is to just have people notice something about their body that is not necessarily specific to the things. This is especially good in your like people who have really long-term persistent symptoms. Like notice which arm feels longer, which foot feels heavier on the floor, something, and then have them do some kind of completely out of context movement, and then just notice again, just to start to like get them into their bodies in a way that they aren't probably most of the time. And then what's amazing is how much doing that actually like changes their own experience in their own body, so that then movements that were not, possible, whether that was from like an emotional guarding or a physical guarding standpoint, become possible. It's truly amazing to me how much of an influence our brains have over our bodies all the time.
Yes. And I think that's what I love about our profession. And again, I'm being partial because there's 2 physical therapists here on the show today, listeners. So no offense to any profession at all. We're just nerding out because we love what we do so much. But I think what I really, truly appreciate, and I have grown to appreciate even more treating patients of all types, is that we really, really, really bring that biopsychosocial approach that people have been like talking about, and it's like been such a buzzword, but like PTs have been doing that. Like we work with our hands, we work with functional movement, we work on traditional exercise, basic kinds of things. We do all of these different things. I know we can't do dry needling anymore in New York State, but we can in New Jersey. But we have so many modalities, and at the end of the day, the goal is not, we need to just stretch your hamstrings or something. It's so much more than that. And it's so much more lifestyle and confidence and getting people to really love living in their bodies and being able to do the things that they want to do. And that's how we've been trained to set our goals with our patients. Our SMART goals that we learn in school is like, find what are these big participation things in the world that these people have difficulty with, and then figure out what is it that's limiting them. And it could be as minute as, again, the example of the hamstring stretch that needs to be done, but it's serving a bigger purpose. And I think that big picture mentality as a PT, going into my sessions with all of these tools in my toolbox, whether it's like a cup, like cupping or something, just anything, like the fun things that we can do, even dancing. Like I dance with my patients as a warm-up all the time. Like I'm a dancer. Like
I love that.
So many sessions. Like I have taken a religious leader to do jump squats down his hallway, and he had to lock the door because he couldn't let anyone see that he was doing that, because that's not very kosher. But I was like, we're gonna do bunny rabbit hops all the way down. That's what we're doing today. But I think that's what I love about it. And I love everything that you're doing in terms of fitness, strength training, and just thinking of things in different ways. I think that's really important. And like you said, we're learning forever. Like the way that I'm thinking right now, I hope that you and I don't think this way 10 years from now. And I hope we sit back down on Fit as a Fiddle and we're like, just like the question I asked you, like, what did you think 5-6 years ago that you feel is so different now? I hope that we sit 5-6 years later from now and go, oh, you know what? I think I'm going to start doing this differently because this has been so helpful, because that's the beauty of our work, and it's constantly evolving, and we evolve with it.
And the information changes too. I mean, there are things that we learned to be true in PT school that are just not, and I think part of what like the hallmark of a good clinician in my eyes is a person, and this is something that I aspire to be. It's hard to do this, but is to always be open to being proved wrong, because that is, I mean, if somebody can come to me with information that really shows me that I was wrong, then I need to be able to be open to that. Otherwise, I'm just going to continue doing something that's probably a disservice to people. And so I think there's really something to be learned from every person, even if their outlook is different or their approach is different from yours, probably especially if their approach is different from yours, because then, that just gives you more tools, like you said, and gives you a little bit more options, because the same thing is not going to work for every single person who walks in.
Exactly. I love all of that. Julia, is there anything else you want to add to our conversation today, or anything you feel like you still want to cover that you haven't already?
I guess one thing to say too is, like, one population that probably we have in common. I know you mentioned people with endo. I know I work with a lot of people with endo and people with PCOS and other like metabolic endocrine type of issues, is to like bring strength training into those populations. Also, I think we kind of shy away sometimes from doing that in populations like that because of symptoms like chronic fatigue and other metabolic issues or pain or whatever is going on. But like, that really is a population where there is so much room to make that cup bigger. You just have to do it in a way that gives their nervous system enough time to accommodate to it. So that, you don't want to be doing like HIIT workouts with that person, but if you can have that person lift a heavy thing maybe 3 times well, and then take a good long break, you can still build capacity for that person. And it's probably one of the biggest things that they need. So I think metabolic function and all of those things, it's so important through the lifespan, but definitely in those populations too. Like, that's probably some of where the biggest bang for your buck is going to be, if you can start to introduce a little capacity building.
I love that. So tell us a little bit about where your practice is, your Instagram and website. And also, I know you're doing a certification in functional nutrition coaching, so I'd love to hear about all of that as well.
Yeah. So my practice is in DUMBO in New York City. That's like the first stop into Brooklyn, right by the waterfront, if you are local to the area. But I also see clients virtually, both for physical therapy and for training. My Instagram handle is at Empower Physical Therapy with underscores between the words, and my website is empowerpt.nyc. You asked me one other thing, and
The functional nutrition
don't remember
coaching.
what it was. Oh, yes. Okay. So one of the new offerings that I'm really excited to bring to my practice is that I just am about to complete a year-long certification in functional nutrition coaching. And I'm hoping to launch that program in spring 2023, but it'll be, for me, a really great way to complement some of what I'm doing, especially with those populations that I was mentioning, with like history of metabolic issues or chronic fatigue, or endocrine issues and stuff like that, to help them feel a little bit more energy and help them grow that cup and improve their body terrain in a couple of other ways that are a little more outside of moving in the ways that I'm already offering them. So I'm looking forward to that.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Julia, for your work and for, breaking boundaries and barriers and talking about, new and novel ways to treat patients and look at our, various things that we do in our profession. So I thank you for that. I'll drop all of the information you just said onto the show notes. So listeners, you can go and check out Julia's Instagram. She's phenomenal. I love watching your stuff. So definitely take a look at that. And hopefully people can reach out to you for some of your other services when they're all ready as well.
For sure. That'd be great.